Okay, Joe, I think should we get started?
Ready when you are.
Great, okay. Well, welcome to everyone that's joined us today. I'm Judy Deutsch. I am the Central Region Coordinator with the Ontario Centre for Workforce Innovation. On behalf of the OCWI team, would really like to thank all of you for joining us today for this webinar, An Accessible Future, Resources for Hiring Persons with Disabilities. I just wanted to kind of clarify the presentation. It's very much targeted at the business audience and the value of engaging people with disabilities. I know we have a variety of people on the call today or on the webinar today, but just wanted to point out that it's very much geared to the business audience. So knowing that's kind of the lens that Joe's looking through with his presentation. This webinar is one in a series of webinars that the Ontario Centre for Workforce Innovation has been holding. All of our webinar topics have been chosen based on input from meeting with various partners and stakeholders like yourself. And what are some of the key topic areas? Employer engagement, business engagement was right at the top of the list from a point of areas of interest. So we're really excited to have Joe with us today to share his experience and expertise in business engagement. Joe is the Chief Executive Officer of the Ontario Disability Employment Network. The centre itself focuses on engaging and educating businesses about the benefits of hiring people with a disability. Joe works closely with stakeholders. I'm sure many of you have worked with him in the past. I know I have, and have learned so much from Joe. He works in both the public and the private sectors, offering experience and expertise on disability matters. So while the focus of Odin and a lot of Joe's work is the strategic engagement of business, focused around the value of hiring people with disabilities, his expertise and experience crosses all sectors and all population groups. So I think he's really got some magic when it comes to engaging those businesses, and excited that he's going to share it with us today. Before I turn it over to Joe, just a few quick things. Everyone's on mute except the speaker, so we'll be able to hear Joe, but not you. It's a big group, so kind of necessary. But we do want to offer up the opportunity for question and comment. So you'll see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A. Please feel free to jot things down through the presentation. If Joe's able to kind of make a break and address the question, he will. If not, we've certainly got time at the end of the presentation to cover those off. There's closed caption available. It's right down at the bottom as well. If you click, it'll come up as closed caption. One quick little housekeeping thing. If you're using it, you'll find it then hard to push on the Q&A, so you just have to move it out for a bit so you can hit the Q&A tab. Joe's going to speak for approximately 30 to 35 minutes, and then, as I said, we'll open it up for Q&A. So without further ado, I am going to open it up to Joe now. Thanks, Joe.
Great, thank you very much, Judy. Good morning, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to just thank the Ontario Chamber of Commerce and the Ontario Centre for Workforce Innovation for inviting me to deliver this presentation to you. And, you know, I do a lot of presentations with businesses and a lot of information sharing. And I'm going to start off because I typically find businesses don't necessarily understand what the disability demographic looks like in Canada. So I'm going to start off with a few facts and figures just to set the stage for those businesses. Recent Statistics Canada data that was just released in December report that 22% of our Canadian population is comprised of people who have a disability. At 22% of the population, that's equal to the combined population of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. That's how many people live with a disability in Canada. That's a little more than 1 in 5. It's the largest minority in the country, and it's actually growing quite rapidly as we have the age of the aging baby boomers who are facing issues around hearing impairment, vision loss, mobility, and things like that. So it's a big demographic and fast growing. In Ontario alone, that's 3.1 million Ontarians who live with a disability. The challenge we have is that only about 49% or 51% of people with disabilities are in the workforce at all. So 49% unemployed according to Stats Canada. But we have to put that figure into perspective. When we talk about employed and unemployed, this is according to our labor market data. And to count in that data, you have to have some workforce attachment. That means you have to have been working within the last 3 to 5 years. So it doesn't include those people who have never broken into the workforce for the first time and those people who have given up trying to get into the workforce. So we know that that figure of 49% unemployed, while it's statistically accurate, the number of people out of the workforce is much, much greater. We also know that 40% of those individuals who have a disability have post-secondary degrees and diplomas. And in Canada, we do an excellent job at getting young people with disabilities into post-secondary education. But the reality is those who go through college and universities and graduate have the same unemployment rate as those who didn't finish high school. So we really have a lot of talent available that we're not accessing and we're not tapping into, and that's a wasted resource that we need to consider. One of the most important factors when it comes to disability in Canada is that when you take the number of people who have a disability and you add to that family and loved ones, it's actually 53% of the population which is affected by disability. So 53% of the population affected, that means that 53% of your customers are impacted or affected by disability. 53% of your employees are affected by people with disability, and it's a very, very big component. And I don't find that we typically look at disability as a marketplace issue, but there's been lots of research showing that the impact of disability on this 53% is very broad-based and impacts people's decisions around purchasing, around employer engagement, and all of those factors. So something that can't be overlooked when we look at numbers of this substantial substance. I'm going to show a little video here that puts this into a global perspective.
People with disabilities represent over 1.3 billion people globally. When combined with friends and family, the disability market touches 53% of consumers and controls over $8 trillion in annual disposable income. The size and scope of this market is large and unrealized. People with disabilities have functional demands that dovetail nicely with the needs of aging baby boomers and represent a viable talent source as labor markets tighten. The disability market is tipping. Are you ready? The return on disability model highlights specific actions each business can take to maximize value by delighting their customers, attracting great talent, and leveraging innovation from people with disabilities to making existing assets more productive. Companies that enhance their customer experience by utilizing insights from the disability market outperform their peers in revenue growth. Public and private organizations that hire individuals with disabilities with motivated intent benefit from employees who generate lower costs and higher productivity, resulting in higher returns. Leveraging insights from disability drives productivity. Complex and costly processes become simplified and more efficient overall when designed by and for people with disabilities. Top organizations understand this model and use it to their advantage. Disney incorporates park design features for the disability market, enhancing customer experience for all. It continuously incorporates the disability experience into its on-screen characters, bonding with its customers, and making Disney a leader in value creation. Google's disability-driven innovation leads to product design it then applies to its core customers. From the beta stage, disability market needs are the inspiration for Google's many now mainstream innovations. Google Glass, Google Voice, and Google Car find their roots in disability and drive Google to the top ranking in ROD research. TD Bank is a leader in value creation due to the inclusion of people with disabilities in their talent pipeline, as well as how the company talks about the disability market as a driver of their business. TD sets an excellent example for brands wishing to communicate the connection of disability to business results. Attract the disability market and improve customer experience. Grow your top line, find the right talent, and increase shareholder value for investors. Do disability right to delight customers and shareholders. Connect with us to get started today.
So that just gives you a bit of a perspective on the marketplace from a global perspective. And as you can see, you know, $8 trillion US dollars. I don't know many businesses that wouldn't want a little piece of that market. And that's a part of the message in understanding how disability plays in your community. But what we've seen traditionally, as I mentioned earlier, is people with disabilities typically shut out of the labor market. And there's been a number of reasons for that. You know, sometimes it's skills mismatch, but more often than not, it's a lack of understanding and a lot of myths and misconceptions that create the barriers that businesses cause businesses to not include people with disabilities in the workforce. Often it's the idea that it might cost more or be more challenging and so forth. But we're finding today businesses that are engaging people with disabilities in a meaningful and an intentional way are really seeing superior results in their businesses, that it's actually contributing positively to their bottom line. So I'm going to run through a couple of business cases and just show you some examples. The first one is Walgreens, a US pharmacy retailer, and they started engaging people with disabilities in a big way in their distribution centers initially, and then moved into their retail and corporate enterprises. But their starting point was in South Carolina in 2006, where they engaged 40% of the workforce as being comprised of people with disabilities. And we'll show you a little video to see how that played out for them.
With every box that's opened, every button that's pressed, and every crate that's sorted, employees at this Walgreens distribution center in Windsor, Connecticut are breaking down barriers. Just ask Julie Williard.
It's my dream to work here. It is okay to be yourself, and it's okay to be that. And it's okay to have disabilities while you work.
More than 40% of the people working here report having a disability.
When you have autism like I have, it's tough to overcome it when you work, and when you get better at it, then you pick up the pace and go from there. I may have a seizure that will cause me to fall backward.
This is something that you think has held you back in the past.
Yes, it has.
The thing that makes this building different is that people are accepted. Everyone is working right next to each other. 80% of this department is people with disabilities, and you really can't tell one from the other.
And that's the point. Did this idea also come out of something personal in your life?
Certainly. I mean, I have a son with autism who is now 23.
For Walgreens' Randy Lewis, what began as an experiment has been a revelation for the company, which now plans to introduce Lewis's program in its retail stores.
We sell people with disabilities stores. We think their abilities are like this. What we found is they're much broader.
Equality is at the core of Walgreens' inclusive hiring policy. Equal pay, equal work, and equal expectations, sometimes with a little help to make sure everyone can meet those expectations.
If you look up here at this workstation, we have a picture of a cow. So this whole department is called the zoo. This is station 11, but if I don't know numbers, 11 doesn't mean anything to me. So we name it the cow station as well.
The special accommodations cost the company less than $25 per worker. And Lewis says workers with disabilities have fewer workplace accidents, lower absenteeism, and lower turnover than people without disabilities.
It's the people without disabilities who realize that we are committed, that we're part of something bigger. Yes, we're capitalists and we have to serve our shareholders, but we have to serve each other in our community.
Allison Cossack, CNN, Windsor, Connecticut.
So this was the Walgreens Center in Connecticut. As I mentioned previously, they started in 2006 in South Carolina, and the success there was so great, they moved into Connecticut in 2007. But in that video you just saw, let's hammer down a little bit at some of the data and some of the analysis of how that worked out for them. So the center in Windsor, Connecticut, where they have 47% of the workforce is comprised of people with disabilities. That distribution center's had the highest productivity rating of any distribution center in the Walgreens chain every single year since opening in 2007. Not only that, but they've seen 40% reduction in safety incidents, 67% reduction in medical costs, 63% reduction in absenteeism, and overall 78% lower employee costs other than payroll. So here we're seeing higher productivity at lower cost. And what we're finding is other businesses now are emulating this Walgreens model to one degree or another. And it doesn't seem to matter what type of industry we go into, we're seeing similar results. So in Toyota, we've been working with in Indiana, they have a team with 16 positions of people who have disabilities, quite significant disabilities. They've been doing assembly and sub-assembly work in that plant. And in their performance, they've produced 6 million parts with only one defect and over 200,000 working hours with zero safety incidents. So again, positive results by engaging people with disabilities in the workforce. Dare Foods in Cambridge, Ontario, what they found is they hired 7 people in 2017. Their turnover rate in that warehouse is 15% for their employees with disabilities versus a 40% average turnover. Their absenteeism, 1.3% versus a warehouse average of 2%. In the first 9 months, they believe they've saved over $200,000. They've since gone on to hire 10 people in their distribution center in South Carolina and have just recently hired 3 additional people in Cambridge and are now looking at hiring people with disabilities in their Milton facilities as well in Ontario. Tim Hortons, Mark Wafer is a Tim Hortons owner who had 6 locations in Scarborough, Ontario. He had 46 employees with a disability, so representing 17% of his workforce and pretty closely mirroring the greater population of Canada and Ontario when it comes to representation. His employees with disabilities had an 87% lower absenteeism rate. He never had a WSIB claim or a workplace insurance claim in over 21 years for any of his employees who had a disability. And he often says, I wish I could say that about the rest of the team. His overall turnover rate is 38% versus an industry average of 110%. So Mark chalks up his cost of turnover for an entry-level position at roughly $4,000 per hire. So if his turnover rate is 38% and he looks out his front window or his front door and sees a Tim Hortons across the street that's not hiring people with disabilities, that's facing 110% turnover, this is directly impacting his bottom line and his profitability, having that lower turnover rate. What's interesting when he describes it is that the turnover of his employees with disabilities is barely 1%, but his turnover for his non-disabled employees is dropped to 55%. So even there, half of the industry average. And why is that? And he attributes it to employee engagement, greater employee engagement. People want to be part of something that has a social fabric to it and has that conscientiousness to it. When you think about results, last year, all 6 of his locations outperformed the corporate averages in 16 economic indicators. And in January of 2018, his locations ranked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 out of over 480 Central Region Tim Hortons locations in both sales increases and transactional increases. Those are the #1 and #2 indicators of profitability. So as I say, it doesn't seem to matter what type of industry you're in. Meaningful and motivated and intentional engagement of people with disabilities in the workforce can lead to superior results. We've been dealing with Rockwall in Milton, doing the equipment operation. They've hired 6 individuals from the deaf community, and they're manufacturing positions around equipment operation, upkeep and maintenance of equipment, line assembly, and so forth. And what they found in a very short time was these new hires allowed them to start up a brand new production line much sooner than anticipated, and has brought them on stream with meeting their expansion goals. all through this inclusive hiring strategy. The bottom line, obviously, for business is higher performance at lower cost is leading to greater profitability. And I think that's what every business is striving for, and why you should consider engaging people who have a disabilities in your workforce. But there is a personal side to this as well. And also, I think the recognition that there are roles and jobs in every business for everybody, no matter what the disability. We can learn how to do this. And this is a scenario at a law firm in London, Ontario. And essentially the law firm was interested in hiring someone with a disability, and they particularly were attracted to this young lady, Kelly, who has Down syndrome. But they weren't really sure what Kelly could do in the law firm. So the firm brought in a community agency, in this case was Community Living London, who came into the business and spent about a half of a day doing a complete analysis of all of the work that was going on at Cohen Hiley, the law firm. And at the end of the day said, you know, there probably is no one single job that Kelly can do. However, if we looked at a reverse engineering approach and take bits and pieces of other people's work, we could certainly carve out an opportunity and a job for Kelly. Now, we're not typically in the business of, you know, creating jobs where jobs don't exist, but the firm really wanted to do this. So they said, great, let's try it. And so in Kelly's case, they took filing, photocopying, delivering mail, setting up for meetings, and a whole host of tasks, and created this full-time job for her. And Kelly had been working at the firm for 4 years. And I invited Joe Hoffer to come and speak at a Chamber of Commerce breakfast meeting with me. And he said, okay. And when he showed up, he said, you know, we always knew this was the right thing to do, but since we were asked to speak today, we thought, let's make sure we know what we're talking about. So they did a complete performance review of the work that Kelly does for them and of her performance on the job. And what Joe said was, we believe that Kelly actually saves us the cost of 2.5 legal secretaries, because those highly trained, highly skilled, and highly paid individuals no longer needed to leave their workstations to file, to photocopy, deliver mail, all work that needed to be done, but not necessarily in the traditional way that it had always been done in the past. So that reverse engineering really ended up benefiting the company. But Joe went on and he said, but not only that, but in 4 years, Kelly hasn't missed a single day of work, and we have to force her to take her vacation because she loves her job so much and loves coming to work. And that becomes infectious in the office, and all of the staff in the office enjoy it when Kelly's in the workforce with them. He went on and said, and they've also had customers who say, the reason we do this with you, we come and do business with you, is because you do this. You mirror our community and our reality. So a very successful scenario for Joe. Kelly went on and worked at the firm for 23 years before retiring. She's married, owns her own condominium with her husband, and living the full life because she's had a great, meaningful career with the law firm. And the law firm's had a great employee for that period of time. So there is a success side to it on both sides of it, for the business and for the people who end up getting into the workforce. So the keys to success, and first and foremost, is to hire with motivated intent. You know, in years gone by, we saw a lot of tokenism when it came to hiring people with disabilities, and that typically doesn't work out in the long term. It's much better to be more intentional about it, and also to manage that inclusion process well. And that's a very important aspect to it, is managing that inclusion process. It's not difficult, but it does need to be managed well. Some of the things that we do with businesses that help manage that inclusion process, we'll come in and help do reviews of your recruitment processes, whether it's your job descriptions and postings. Often businesses tell us they're open to hiring people with disabilities, but they can't attract people with disabilities. Sometimes it's that the way you're hiring and your recruitment process that maybe create barriers that you're unaware of. So we can help you look at those processes. We do a lot of training of recruiters and HR people, accessibility audits, disability awareness and sensitivity training. And this is an important factor when businesses look to hire and include people with disabilities in the workforce. you need to get buy-in at all levels. You need the senior leadership support and understanding, but you also need support from your frontline managers and supervisors. You don't want a manager or supervisor feeling they have someone who's a burden on their team. So we need to train them on disability etiquette, understanding the contributions that a person with a disability can make, and also how to manage and supervise that person effectively, just like every other employee. And then finally, we make connections to reliable suppliers, which would be the employment agencies in your community, and looking at which ones have a viable candidate pool for your business and the support services that might be needed. And then, of course, there's always customer service and ongoing monitoring and capacity building. Sometimes things happen 2, 3, 4 months down the road, and you might have a question or a concern. We're available to you to help resolve any of those types of things that might emerge over time. A few businesses that we've worked with, and just in conclusion, I would suggest that, if you're not engaging people with disabilities in the workforce, then I think you're really running down a rocky road around your future labor needs and future profitability. A recent study from the Ontario Chamber of Commerce showed that 78% of their members saw labor shortages as their #1 business constraint. There is a labor market here that's ready, willing, and able, and we need businesses need to tap into that demographic if they want to be successful going forward. So that concludes the formal part of my presentation. I think we're just coming up on 30 minutes. There is 15 minutes allowed for questions through the Q&A box on your bottom of your screen. If you'd like to ask questions, we can field questions for a few minutes. Can't believe there's no questions.
Joe, I've got a question, if that's okay.
Sure.
I know you mentioned the keys to success. What do you think are some of the primary reasons that businesses or employers don't engage or don't pursue, hiring people with disabilities?
Sure. Well, I think there's a number of myths and misconceptions, and I think the case studies really speak to those myths and misconceptions. A lot of the misconceptions that people with disabilities are going to be not as productive, that they are going to miss more time at work, that they're accident prone or will bring on safety issues. I think really, Judy, it's the fear of the unknown and really having that assistance to manage the process. How do we build internal capacity within our business to understand this population, this demographic, and to manage it well and to work with it well. And so that's what we try to do with businesses, is really help them with the how-tos of engaging people with disabilities in the workforce.
Right.
Ultimately, businesses are driven by bottom line, and that means they need to be successful. And even when it comes to recruitment, they need to be successful. And we get in there and help them be successful at engaging this population in the workforce.
Right. And kind of speaking to that from a point of the initial engagement and relationship management, it's quite a long process then, engaging with the employers and supporting them through the process.
Not necessarily. It really depends on the business itself, whether the business is open and willing, and how complex the business is. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's a one-day scenario. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. It really depends on what the jobs are and what the business is, and some of the complexities. Often we find ourselves working with businesses who are getting ready, say, to launch a new production line, and we try to work in step with them so that, if they say, come September, we're going to launch and we need 30 employees, we might start working with them in March or April and say, okay, let's get ready so that in September, maybe, 20% or 30% of those employees could be covered off through people who have a disability. Sometimes more. It really depends on the business. So it doesn't have to be long and complicated. Our motto is let's make it as simple as possible.
Right.
And let's work with the business's existing processes as much as possible. And usually it's a little bit of tweaking and fine tuning as opposed to a radical overhaul.
Great. Well, I think we've got a few questions from the audience now, Joe.
In my experience, what are the direct manager's main fears about hiring people with disabilities? So this is something that's not statistical or proven, but when we do focus groups with businesses, often they'll talk to us on the confidential or on the QT and say, one of the greatest fears is the fear of firing. What if this doesn't work out? And this is where we believe that your engagement with a good service agency can really be beneficial, because we try to reduce the risk of it not working out as much as possible, even to the tune of if it's not working out, we'll actually can help a business with their outplacement processes. But there is that very real fear of, what if this doesn't work? Then what happens? Am I stuck with this person? Am I going to end up in, human rights tribunals, et cetera, et cetera? And, there's no evidence that shows any more human rights tribunals with people who have a disability than any other human rights tribunal, but that fear is there. And I think we have to acknowledge that fear, and we have to work with it and support the business to ensure that isn't the barrier, and how we can overcome that barrier. Anonymous attendee, many of the businesses you've mentioned are medium and large in size. How would you incorporate what you've been discussing in small business with few employees and not a lot of resources? Okay, well, that's a good question. Interestingly, the majority of people who have a disability who are actually working in small businesses. And I think that when it comes to small businesses, what we see is a number of things. A, their processes are usually less complicated. B, those businesses are usually more flexible and able to make adjustments and change quickly according to their needs. But also, I think there's a greater dependency on the local employment agency to help support that business through the process. So I would suggest that you don't need a lot of resources in the small business context, where a business might hire 1, 2, or 6 people, or whatever that looks like. But the agency that you work with as a business, do a bit of your homework. Make sure you're getting a good supplier, and that supplier is going to provide you with the kind of customer service you need as a business. And from the agency perspective, I think the onus is on the agency to provide exceptional customer service to their business clientele. Okay, Judy, I don't see any.
Sorry there, just I was a little slow with my get my video on. I don't know if there's any other questions. We'll just, if anyone has anything, if you could type it in now. We'll just wait a minute. Joe, I don't know if you have any kind of final comments or anything else you wanted to share.
Well, there's plenty I could go on about, Judy, but I really think, for an introductory presentation, we don't want to overwhelm people, but I do believe that, there's an extremely competitive labor market out there right now. And businesses who are not looking at what might be termed non-traditional labor sources need to figure this out in order to meet their business goals. They need to look at all sources of labor, and that if they overlook the disability demographic for a number of reasons, they're really going to miss out. That 53% is a pretty compelling number. And every business we've worked with, we've done disability awareness and sensitivity training for many, many businesses. Even, what we get back from the rank and file and the unionized staff is comments about, well, my brother has a disability and I'd love to think that someone would hire them, or my son has a disability, and people really relate to it. And I think the emotional attachment of that 53% is very, very strong, much stronger than the emotional attachment to interest rates or unemployment rates or any other statistic that's out there. So I think that businesses really need to figure this one out. And obviously, we and other employment agencies are out there able to help and make sure it's successful for business. I just see we have one more question. The services that you provide to assist with recruitment processes are something I'd be interested in having support. Joe, you mentioned that if I needed assistance in onboarding people with disabilities, you would be able to offer assistance. I'd like to take you up on that. How can I do that? Well, on this last screen, you see my name and my email connection. Simply send me an email and we'll make time for a conversation. It might be myself or one of my diversity and inclusion specialists, but we'd certainly connect with you and respond to that email and see what we can do to help you. Can you speak to incentives? Well, I can speak to incentives. I guess this is, for clarification, this is where governments are giving incentives to businesses to hire people with disabilities. We typically steer clear of incentives for a number of reasons. First of all, most businesses don't really want to be tied to government when it comes to paperwork and filing and, you know, having that connection. But I guess more critically, you know, when we offer to a business people who can meet their business needs and who can perform at great success, why would we have to pay the business to hire those people? It doesn't seem to make sense to me that if a business wants to be successful, they need to invest in that success. Often we find, you know, the incentives get in the way if the person isn't performing well. The business may, you know, carry that person because they're getting the incentive, but when the incentive program is over, then they tend to, you know, drop that employee. And the longer you have an employee who's not performing in your workforce, the more challenging and difficult that termination becomes. So we find if there's benefit to the business by hiring, and that should always be, you know, what we're striving for is for the business to profit and to be successful, then, you know, those incentives tend to get in the way.
I don't know if you can see, Joe, there's a few more. One from Valerie.
Oh, okay, I'll just scroll down, sorry. The human resource advisor I interviewed was afraid that a disabled employee would be discriminated against by other employees. How can we address that kind of fear? You know, we've heard this, but we rarely see it in reality. But if it is a fear, then I think you need to address it. So the way we do that is part of our service to help the business build capacity and understanding is we do disability awareness and sensitivity training for whoever in the business that business wants us to address. So in some cases, Dare Foods, Rockwall, and so forth, we've done disability sensitivity and awareness training for every employee in the facility. You know, they had us come in the middle of the night and do training for the night shift, the day shift, the afternoon shift, the unions, and in every case, we've seen broad-based acceptance, and that really this fear is not well-founded at all. And I'm not saying there haven't been occasions when people might get teased or bullied, but we find if people get the sensitivity and awareness training, and they're more open and engaging, then it works better. And we don't see this actually becoming a reality. So.
Good. Well, I think we've covered off the questions, and we're just coming up. I think maybe gave you 5 minutes of found time to those of you participating. I just wanted to thank Joe. This has been fantastic. Lots of great inspiration. I know, hearing kind of the case studies of other employers and what they're doing kind of gets the juices flowing, right? From a point of thinking of some of the other businesses that we're working with out there and inspiring them to do the same. So thanks very much. I would encourage anyone, to follow up with Joe. He's been kind enough to provide his details there. I think if you're looking at the whole business and employer engagement piece, Joe's one of the best people to connect with. He's done lots of it. So thanks to you for all of your time and for joining us for Joe's webinar.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
Okay. I look forward to hearing from people.
Great.